Brother Norman, did you find that little thing we were talking about? That little picture I sent you, did you find something along those lines? I have a few minutes. If you got a minute to look for it. And don't have to be the exact one, just something that says pretty much the same thing. And you can just holler at me when you find it, and I'll go ahead and get started. All right, it's good to be in the house of the Lord this morning. Thank God for an opportunity to be able to be back together with you once again and stand and share His Word. I tell you, His Word is alive to us if we'll just grasp a hold of it. It's alive. It'll teach us how to live and help us through all walks of life, no matter where we're at in life. His Word will help us if we'll just take it and read it and apply it to our hearts and through our life. I mean, He sent the Word to heal us and to deliver us from our destruction. His Word's there, and it's alive, and it'll help if you're willing to put it in your heart. David said, hide it in your hearts, that you might not sin against Him. But we started last Sunday night in Luke, and I won't reteach like what I did last week, but I will have to say a few things to get started just in case you was not here. But I told you we decided to go through the book of Luke. You know, we've been through two of the Gospels. We went through John, been through Matthew last, and I chose Luke because some of this stuff I've already said, but I'm going to say it again quickly. John and Matthew were writing from a first-hand experience. They walked with Christ as a disciple of Christ every day. Luke did not do that. Luke, I told you before, Luke is not an apostle. He is a Bible writer. You had to have a relationship with Jesus Christ in the flesh, more or less, at least met Him to be called an apostle. So Luke is not considered an apostle. He's the only Greek New Testament writer, only Gentile to ever write anything in the New Testament about Christ or anybody. And so it puts him more on a relationship where you and I are at. Because I never physically in the flesh walked with Jesus as a disciple, although I'm spiritually His disciple today and have been for a good while. But I didn't see Him and walk with Him like John and Matthew did. So that's the difference. So, and what Luke did was went back, and he went back and found out had found out about Christ. So he goes to Jerusalem and writes a letter back to a guy by the name of Theophilus. Very little is known about him other than he's probably a Roman governor or a Roman official of some type. But we know that Luke writes back to him, and he tells him from eyewitnesses things that had happened. In other words, he goes back. I told you that we would be talking a lot about the declaration of the cross, and we talked about that Sunday night, and that'll continue through our next several lessons. That's what John, or Luke, I don't know why I want to say John for every time, but Luke is trying to tell us. And he's declaring the cross of Jesus Christ, and he's doing three things in that. He's using eyewitnesses to tell Theophilus the validity of it, or that it's a valid story. And he's talking about the value of the cross, and he's talking about the victory of the cross. And over and over and over, we're going to see that in Luke's writings. The first four verses in the book of Luke is written on a highly educated level, and I mean like academically. I mean, it would be like something we would read in English and probably not really grasp it unless you were highly educated yourself. The first four verses, there's one sentence in the Greek. All four verses, just one long sentence in the Greek, and it shows that Luke's educated, and it shows that he's writing this letter on a scholarly or academically based level. In other words, he wants it to be true. I mean, or he wants Theophilus to understand everything. But once he gets through verse 4 and starts in verse 5, everything he writes from then on is written in the common language that all men can understand. There's no trick to it. I mean, he just wrote on a much lower level to where even children could understand the book of Luke. But the first four verses in one sentence, it just lets him know that Luke has the education. He has credentials to write such a letter, but he don't choose to use educated words that you wouldn't understand to do so. But he does do that when he's addressing. And Luke, not only that, there's a lot of things we want to know about Jesus' birth. There's a lot of things, and we're going to talk about that today. There's things we want to know about John the Baptist. So, Matthew picks up with writers assuming they know all about Jesus. about where he come from, the lineage, and he does that. But Luke doesn't assume anything. What Luke does is he goes back. How quick can you pull up Malachi chapter 4, verse 5 and 6? Let me tell you this, and we're going to go back to one here in just a second, but I'm just telling you what Luke did. Luke went back, he didn't assume that you knew anything. And there's a difference if you don't know that. You come in the middle of a story and you don't know nothing, you'll be lost. Luke don't assume you know anything. He goes back to the beginning. So what would be the beginning considered in Luke's day? Well, God hadn't spoken to his people in over 400 years through a prophet or through word. Hadn't done that. I've been asked lately, wonder why, and I can't answer that other than history repeating itself, because he went 400 years and let his people stay in bondage in Egypt. But for 400 years, from between the Old Testament and New Testament, or 400 some odd years, God hadn't spoke. So Luke goes back to Malachi 4, chapter 4, verses 5 and 6. So what he does, he goes back to the last thing we have in the Old Testament. I don't know if you realize how the Old Testament ends. Some of you may, some of you don't read, maybe it's off you, but it's what it does. Malachi is writing, and the last two verses of the Old Testament say this: Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming and great and dreadful day of the Lord. Talking about before the Lord's return and before the tribulation period and all that. I'll send them back. Next verse. And he shall turn the hearts of fathers to the children, and the heart of the children to their fathers, lest I come and smite the earth with a curse. So we're going to find out. Go back to, I've just shared that with you, so when that time comes, you'll know. So Luke picks back up to talk about the coming of Elijah, which was John the Baptist. That was fulfilled in John the Baptist. But Luke does that. Let's back up to go back to Luke. We'll go back to Luke 1, and I'll read the first 4 verses, and then we'll move on from there. I was just trying to recap some of the stuff I said last week. But Luke chapter 1, verse 1. For as much as many have taken in hand and set in order a declaration of those things that are most surely believed among, and notice he says us, he don't say them. So that means that Luke at this time, whether I don't know what Luke's status was when Luke was writing from like a reporter's point of view. I told you that last week. He's interviewing people, countless and countless numbers of people that Luke's interviewed to write this report, and he tells us that. So he said, many have taken order to set forth in order a declaration of things which are most surely believed among us. Verse 2. Even as they delivered them unto us, which from the beginning were what? Eyewitnesses and ministers of the word. So we've already covered this. Keep going. Next verse. It seemed good to me also, having had perfect understanding of all things from the very first. In other words, he went back to the beginning, and he said, I'm going to write to set unto thee most order. First to write unto thee in order, most excellent Theophilus. Next verse. That thou mightest know the certainty of these things. In other words, what Luke's telling him here, he's telling Theophilus, listen, everything I'm about to write is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And it's going to be instruction. Thou mightest know the certainty of these things. You'll know how to happen, what come about, what taking place. I mean, he's given to everything wherein thou hast been instructed. But he wanted the truth of the matter, at Theophilus, and that's exactly what Luke does. He goes back and he gets the truth of everything. Now, verse 5 is where we'll pick up at. Technically, I read those first 4 verses Sunday night. He goes all the way back to before John the Baptist was born. I mean, he didn't have to do that. I believe it was in order. I believe it's what God's will, what God wanted, everything that God wanted us to know. And so Luke went back, because I say Matthew and John didn't cover that much of this part of their life, if any. There was in the days of Herod, the king of Judea. Now, a lot of times in Bible writings, you'll notice, and I believe they did this so that we could look back later and see where history lines up with the Bible. But a lot of times, even in the Old Testament, they'll tell you when they served, they'll tell you it was in the days of this king of Babylon, or the days of this king, and it's throughout, especially the minor prophets. And what that does is that allows them to date in history that you can look back and you know the time and date that this one served, and you can kind of make a comparison to the time frame. And this was Herod in the days of Herod. Herod was a wicked man. I won't get into a lot of details on him, but I mean, he had person after person of his own family slaughtered because he was scared they were going to take his throne. I mean, but he's known as Herod the Great because of all the big buildings and stuff and structures he was able to put together. That's why he's referred to as great, because his ingenuity to be able to put up buildings. You got to realize by this time they were in a temple from that family, Herod's temple. In Jerusalem, Solomon's temple at this time would have been, they had Solomon's temple, Zerubbabel's temple, and by this time it was known as Herod's temple. What they had redone it, how they had redone it. But he was known for his, like an architectural skills, is what he was known for. But it's just giving us a day and time in history that we can look back to show when it was. There was in the days of Herod, the king of Judea, a certain priest named Zacharias of the course of Abiah, and his wife was of the daughters of Aaron, and her name was Elizabeth. So I'm not going to get a long ways today, but I want you to realize the importance of what's going on in this situation. Think about prayer. I want you to think about prayer in your own life. How many times have you just prayed for something for days? Days turns into weeks. Weeks turns into years. And in all honesty, years turned into decades. That's what we're going to talk about this morning in general, what's going on. I mean, God's got the perfect place. God's got the perfect time. I mean, he knows what he's doing. So back in the Old Testament, there's so many priests. They say there was over 20,000 priests serving. If there was 20,000 preachers at Evergreen, just bear with me, just stick with me. I'm trying to make it where you understand it. How often, Preacher David, would you get to stand behind a pulpit and preach? Without one senior man, I mean, if you just had 20,000 pastors, that ought to give you somewhat of an idea. And one family would serve basically a month. In other words, and a different person out of this family would preach this month and the next month. But there's some scenarios, which is one we're going to talk about today. I think it was once in a lifetime. That's what I believe. And maybe by the time I get done, you'll understand that. But to put that in perspective, it'd be like all these preachers. Preacher David, and you come to this church, that's your pastor, I'm going to pick on you. You come to this church every day of your life, and you're 20, 30 years old, with the hopes of one day of preaching one sermon. One sermon. But you don't know exactly when it's going to be, because they had to pray and they cast lots, and I'll get to it in a minute. But the day finally comes. You prayed, you prayed, but the day finally comes. That's how important this is. If you don't understand what I'm trying to do, that's how important what Zachariah is about to do is. It ain't something he got to do all the time. You don't take 20,000. I'm going to go over some of the furniture. I won't get far, but I want you to understand, is all I'm trying to say, how important this was. 20,000 men that were priests. The temple was, or that tabernacle was, at this time they were still, or when it was started, it was in a tabernacle, but now this would have been the temple. But I'm going to go back to a tabernacle layout. Did you find it? Put it up there for me. And I'm going to just kind of give you a little bit of the job description, and then we're going to talk a little bit more about Zachariah. We're talking about things from the beginning. Now, I didn't start that. Luke did. You remember Luke said, I want you to know from the very start, the first thing. He wants you to know it all. So that's what I'm trying to do. You don't know in the beginning, when God instituted this thing, I mean, he knew the future. He knew everything he was doing. There's 7 things right here that we can see on it. And this is the layout of the Wilderness Tabernacle. But the Solomon's Temple and Herod's Temple would have been in a similar, it just wouldn't have been a portable building. But as far as the layout, many think this is descriptions or describes things that's in heaven, around God's throne. Very well possibly could be. Many believe that. But that outside where the X is, but that outside, was it just a big some type of skin, sheepskin or goat skin, some type of skin, enclosed walls. How many places on there do you see gate? One time. Should have got me a pointing stick. One gate. How many ways are there to heaven? One way. In fact, Jesus said if anybody, talking about in John 10 there, if anybody entered in not by the gate that climbeth up, I believe is the word it used, some other, it's the same as a thief and a robber. There is one way to God, it's Jesus Christ. That ain't something that come about when God already had this thing figured out. He already had this thing figured out. There's one gate. There's one way for it, and I'll hurry. The next one there, if we see right inside the gate, and this gate would have been on the east, right inside that gate, we see the altar of sacrifice. You see, and let's compare that to us. When we come to God and we come through Christ and we hear Jesus Christ preached and we want to be saved and we come to Him, and whether it be at an altar, I don't care where it's at, I don't know where you got saved at, and it don't matter. You're saved, that's what matters. Don't matter where you got, but wherever you were saved, that's where you laid your life down before Christ said, it's not no longer my life, but it's your life. It's an altar of sacrifice, in other words, for you. At that moment in time, you become a living sacrifice for Christ. This altar of sacrifices where they killed all the sacrifices. Now keep in mind, there's 20,000 priests, but then there's 11 other tribes. So they were daily sacrificing animals for different reasons, whatever the case may be. Now, holy holies, that's different, but they still sacrificed, and there were certain things they had to do for sins that they had committed. Regardless, all those priests, talking about a job now, somebody had to kill the sacrifice. That would have been on the priest. Somebody else would have brought the sacrifice for the sin, but the priest would have been the one that would have done the sacrifices because he knew what to do once he got it in his hands. And I won't spend a lot of time there, but you get the picture. The next one is laver. That's where they washed the blood off and the other stuff off, but that's where they cleaned it. Is that making sense now spiritually? You come to Christ, He's the one way. You kneel down and become His sacrifice, and He washes you. I mean, God already had all this thing figured out, and this is where I'll just keep going with me. Then they get inside. We'll say on the right there is a table of showbread. The priest would eat that. I think it was once a week. That may have changed. I didn't look back up. I don't remember, but periodically that would have been considered like a holy type bread, and then periodically they would have eaten it. You see, once you come in the gate and once you present your body like a sacrifice and He cleans you up, then He begins to feed you. The bread represents the Spirit or the Word of God that's there to feed us. On the left side, a lot of people refer to it as a menorah, which is a seven-figure lampstand that comes up. Only a light in the place. Inside of this place is this light, Danny. When all this stuff comes about spiritual Jesus, He's the light. We're coming to the light. The closer you get to the light, the more you can see. Straight up above the candlestick in the center right there on the bottom of underveil says altar of incense. That's the prayers, or a representation of God, or the men's prayers rising or going up to God. So when you come through the gate and you sacrifice and you get washed and He feeds you and He gives you light, you're going to want to pray. You're going to want to worship Him. And then only once a year did any man go beyond the veil. The high priest went in once a year. He actually went in twice in one day, if I understand right. But he only did it one day a year. The first time he went in, it was a sacrifice for his own sins to make sure he was pure before God before he could go back and take men's sins. It's twice the same day, but only once a year. And that was only the high priest. You got to read through the Bible. Sometimes high priests serve several years, sometimes only a year. That's just depending on different situations. We won't get there, but only once a year. And he'd go in to the Ark of the Covenant, and it had them little black circles right there, I think is representing the cherubim that were angels that faced one another on each side. And there was a mercy seat there. And they would go in and take the blood of whatever they had slain and cast it 7 times upon that ark. Does anybody remember what I said about Jesus just a few weeks ago? About 7 times. Anybody remember what I said about Jesus done? It's okay if you don't. I was just asking. But Jesus shed blood from 7 parts of his body. Symbolically, Leon, they doing the same thing here. And some of you may know this, but does anybody see anything else? I ain't putting nobody on the spot now. I wouldn't do you like that. See that line right there? And how about that one right there? That makes sense? You see it? From the beginning, the layout was formed of a cross. I mean, everything was continued about one day Jesus coming to the cross of Calvary and dying for my sins. That didn't catch God by surprise. It weren't an afterthought. It weren't something that just one day he just woke up and said, I'm going to do this. No. Like you and I do. He had a plan from the beginning what he was going to do. Now, I've said all that to show you what's going on with Zechariah. And then we'll go back to Zechariah. I can say more. I mean, I could teach probably a lesson on each one of those parts. But let's go back to what is it, Luke 1:5, I think it was. So there's 20,000 odd priests that go in this place. And some of them had the jobs of the showbread had to be changed on a regular basis. Somebody had to bake it, somebody had to go in, somebody had to put it out. The oil that was in the lamps, somebody, Mr. Owen had to go in there on a daily basis. The oil runs out. Wicks have to be trimmed. So somebody ever had to go in, but still, there's 20,000 people, and only one man would go in to do that. So although there was a few odd jobs, you had a lot of people, which is going to make it rare. It's not once in a lifetime that you get the opportunity to go in and do much, or maybe even a couple of times, but probably no more than a couple of times. I realize there's priests that died every day that could no longer fulfill it, but then there was new priests that come along every day as well. So there were so many priests that David in the Old Testament decided to divide them into 24 categories. David did that because there were so many to make it as fair as he possibly could to give people to get time under God. I believe God led him to do so. But he did that, and it's just telling which group of people that Zechariah come from. And of course, Abiah and his wife was of the daughters of Aaron, and her name was Elizabeth. So what he's also telling us that the priests, which would have been Levites, Zechariah married another woman that was a Levite. Now, listen, they can marry outside their particular tribe to another tribe of Israel. But it really weren't something that was looked up to. It was better if they could find one out of their own tribe. In other words, a priest marrying a priest's daughter, more or less is what I'm trying to say. It was accepted otherwise, but it was better if they were both Levites. And it tells us her name was Elizabeth. Next verse. And they were both righteous before God. I mean, that's two people. I'm just telling you, the Bible says they were well stricken in years. I don't know how old they are. 70? 60 to 80? I don't know. I honestly don't know. 80? I really don't know. And it seemed like nobody noticed what they were doing with the jobs they were doing, but God did. He sees your heart. He sees what you're doing. He hears the prayer, although you may not think it gets answered a lot of times. He's listening. Right. Don't ever think God's not listening to you. Don't ever think that. Because I've been that one that thought that. It's just, you're going to see in the picture, you got to wait on God. Mm-hmm. It's just that simple. You got to wait on Him. And they both were righteous before God. I mean, if they were both righteous and walking in the commandments and the ordinance of the Lord, say that word with me, blameless. I mean, why God didn't give her a child 40 years ago? I'm just talking. Weren't time, Jerry. That's exactly right. It weren't time. God knew what He was doing. He knew exactly what was going to happen. John the Baptist didn't catch Him by surprise. I just told you in Malachi chapter 4, verses 5 and 6 that God said He was coming. And 400 some years later, He sent Him. Yeah. I just can't get over that. And I don't know how to explain myself. How God, you ever sit back and just think about, well, God was here 200 years ago when this was going on, and He just let it go on, knowing a different day was coming. I mean, you think about that. No, you ain't got to elaborate this morning, but just think about that sometime. 500 years ago, wherever was going on, whatever, people were people, and they were sinful and this and that, and God just sits back. And now 2,000 years has passed since Jesus, and He's still sitting back. The time just ain't right. But it's getting closer. Come on. It's getting closer. But just think about that. When I get that on my mind sometimes, I think, God, I just can't imagine that. You know, how you can do that. But they were both righteous before God. It didn't say one of them were. But they were both righteous. God saw everything they did. He saw their hard work. He saw their prayers. He saw everything. And they walked in the commandments and the ordinance of the Lord blameless. And I'm not never going to look at you and tell you they're perfect, because that's not what I'm saying at all. But as far as the law, they were trying to follow the law as close as they could to the letter of what God had given them, the job that He had given them to do. Next verse. And they had no child because that Elizabeth was barren, and they both are now well stricken in years. That's all I really know about their age. They were just went. She was barren. Now, man. So make sure you understand my next statement. Not God, but man had made it up in their mind in this day, if a woman could not have children, it was grounds for divorce. I never said God said that. He ain't saying that at all. But man had made it up in their mind. Because women, I mean, that's what they wanted children from. Man, that's what they got married for. They wanted children, and it was even looked down on if they didn't have a son too as well. I mean, really, a Jewish man, he looked for his firstborn male. I mean, it's just there. Biblically, I could probably get in there and show you where that's what they thought ought to happen. Now, everybody didn't do that. Elizabeth didn't. She didn't have neither have boy nor girl for all these years. God's in control of childbirth. I don't know what the future holds. I know women today like to have children, and I understand. I know some people that can't have them. I understand. But God knows what He's doing. You don't know the future, see. But we serve a God that knows exactly what's going to happen, how it's going to be. I got 3. I won't take nothing for any of them. And maybe I ought not to say this, but it's what I think about it. I'm thankful for all of them, and I hope they live a lot longer than I do. But if I had a choice of not having one of them at all and they winded up in hell, I know which one I would choose. I just couldn't handle that. That would just to die lost and to die so far away from God. I mean, that's 2 deaths. But God knows the future. You should pray. I mean, she faithfully prayed to God. And when the time comes, God, you know the story. We'll get to it. But don't give up on praying whatever you pray for God. God's just waiting on the right time in our life. And that's just not just childbirth. That's with anything in our life. God knows what's going to happen to you. There's been times in my life, Mr. Leon, I won't name things, but there's been times in my life that I got exactly what I wanted. Yep. And it was the worst thing in the world that could ever happen to me. I can't change that. Maybe now it wouldn't have been, but at the time, it was just probably, it wasn't good. That's all I can say. It wasn't good. And that's just things in our life. But God knows. Wait on God. We pray, yes, for those desires and those needs you have. And I pray, seek God, yeah. But wait on Him. Verse 8. And it came to pass that while he executed the priest's office before God in the orders of his course, in other words, the day finally come, and I know we're not going to get there. I'm going to have to quit in a minute, but anyway, the day finally come that he was going to get his opportunity to go in. Next verse. According to the multitude of people were praying without the time of incense. So every morning, I think it was, they went in and filled up this golden censer, we'll call it. And they would take it, and I've been to a Catholic funeral and a Catholic service or two, and maybe some of you have too. But they still use one of the little golden censers in funerals. They'll put something in it that smokes on a chain, and they'll walk. They do very similar to what the Jews did in this day. I mean, I've been. If you hadn't, that's just the way they do. And so that represented the prayers. So all the multitude is outside. They want to know that they're being heard by God. All of us have a desire to want to know God's hearing our prayers. So when a priest went to do a job like this right here, and he had that smoking vessel, as he would go in, they all stood outside looking, wanting to make sure, they wanted to see if he went in and he come out, that God had accepted him. He had accepted their prayers. So they all stand in anticipation outside, and he's walking in with this golden censer to go back and fill. And what they would do, they would take coals, and there's different things that we could talk about, but it's not up. They take coals off the altar that were live coals or hot coals, and keep putting them in there to burn that oil. They would keep using coal, and you couldn't tote the coal, but that's what they put it in this little vessel, and they would take it in there and put it in the pan. To keep the oil, and plus not only you had to change the coal, the oil run out. You had to keep changing those things. So whatever the case may have been, it had to do with the incense. It had to do with prayer. Is all I'm trying to say. If you ain't grasped that by now, it was all to do with prayer. Everything he was fixing to do. Maybe it was his first time. Maybe it was just 8 or 9 times. I really don't know. I don't think so, but just a few times in his life, if very many, just a few times in his life, this would ever happen. And he's prayed. I know the Bible don't tell us a whole lot about it right here, but with what Luke is telling us, you got to know they've been praying for a child. You got to be able to read between the lines. I don't add nothing to the Bible, but I ain't take nothing away from it either. They had to be praying a long time for this need in their life, or this desire they had to have a child. Nothing wrong with that desire. None whatsoever at all. That's what God put us here. I don't mean to be funny. Everybody know the first commandment God ever given in the Bible? Be fruitful and multiply. First commandment God ever given in the Bible. So, it's nothing wrong with wanting a child. No doubt they had prayed and prayed and prayed. And it just hadn't happened. Now they think they're way past child being able to be parents. They're way past that. Sometimes when we think we're ready, we're really not ready. But then when we get where we don't think we're ready, that's a lot of times when God gets ready. I won't tell you what it is. But I prayed a prayer one time. Never done this but once in my life, and I can remember. Won't never do it again. But there was a certain going on in my life. I said, God, I'm ready. Man, I can't tell you what I went through after that. It's unreal what I went through after that. I have never done that again. Lord willing, I hope I don't. But when you get on your knee, and I don't mean that boastfully. In my heart, I thought I was. Really, I'm being honest. I won't tell you what it is. Maybe sometime I will. But I went through something else after that. Because I might have thought I was ready, but God knew I wasn't ready. God knew I wasn't ready. He knew the timing weren't just right, and that's been a right good many. well over 20 years ago, too, or about 20 years ago, that I did that. But it was all about, the sense he was talking in was all about prayer. Let's go another verse and I'll quit. And the whole multitude of the people were praying without at the time of incense. In other words, I've already covered that. They would all be gathered around outside. They wanted to see him go in with the prayers and come back out and know everything's good. God is accepting them. Verse 11. We will have to stop somewhere here, but we'll do it in a minute. And there appeared unto him an angel of the Lord standing on the right side of the altar of incense. Let me say a few things right here, and we'll stop right here. And there appeared unto him on the angel of the Lord standing on the right side of the altar of incense. He's excited because he's getting to do something for God that possibly he'd never done, or at least not done much of it. It was a special occasion for him. It was a special time. I mean, I'm not a preacher, but if I go a month or so and didn't talk, you get the desire you want to. I mean, if you just do. You just do. You get excited. Or at least I do, and I want to do. But here, he's heard all the stories about the other priests that went in there. Well, God did this, or God did that, or God spoke to me. He's probably heard stories like that, but nothing like about to get ready to happen to him. At least I'm not aware of another one in the Bible that I can think of that was like this one. So he's in there, and there are the places, remember what I said? They're burning incense in there, and the smoke represented the prayer. Well, you know what the smoke did, right? It filled the room. He probably don't know what he's seeing when he first sees this thing. I mean, his first thought, is this normal? Does everybody see this? Well, I never heard nobody tell me about this before, right? When he first saw it. I mean, I don't know what happened. Did he think he was losing his mind? Don't know. You would have been scared too. And there appeared to him the angel of the Lord standing in the right side of the altar of incense. And he just looks up and he sees the angel, and the angel's just standing there. You know, a lot of times the angels we see were kind of had bright colors or whatever. We thought they were bright or whatever the case may be. You know, that's just I'm trying to say, what's the word, like a brilliant type color, what I mean. Meaning it's just bright. Maybe that's what I'm trying to say, just bright, where you, even at night. I mean, that's just what you think, I think. They don't tell us here, but he just sees him standing at the altar of incense. And it says on the right side of the altar of incense, I don't know, I'm assuming if he's facing the incense box, he's talking about between the showbread, but it could be the other way around, don't know. I just know it was in the room where he was at, in that little small room, closed-in room that he was in. And what he'd been praying for all of his adult life, God was fixing to work a miracle in his life. And he couldn't see it. See, if God would have did this 30 years prior to this time, maybe, and I'm just using a number, you know what I mean, a long time ago, he's maybe been more excited, so to speak. But we find this story when it happens. I mean, he's like, well, God, it's too late. How many times have we ever thought to God with our prayers, it's too late? Anybody? You just thought, hey, God, it's just too late. Don't worry about that. It's just too late. That's what he was going to say, pretty much, in so many words. In so many words, that's what he was going to say. He was going to tell the angels, too late. Don't ever give up on God. Amen. Don't ever give up on him. He never gave up on you. He ain't forgot about you. He knows where you're at. He knows what you're praying for. He knows what you need. He knows all those things. He knows it all. And maybe if it ain't happened in your life yet, maybe it's just because the time just ain't right. That you're just not quite where God wants you at to get this need met. I got a lot more to say, but I'm going to have to quit because I'm out of time. But anybody got a question or comment? And I'll cover some more next week, Lord willing. Anybody got something you want to say or add? I mean, it's good. Everybody good?
Jay, don't you think
Probably were. 80 plus. Very well could be. Very well, very well.